Hello, welcome back. It's Marjorie from the Red Resistance Podcast. We are here to talk about Suprise, and there was a whole lot of surprises in this episode. I have some housekeeping to start with first. Ideally, if everything goes according to my plan, I am recording this at a time that it seems very reasonable for me to be able to edit this and get this out by the earliest that I can get it out by. Meaning, I believe that I can't put an episode analysis up on any kind of platform until noon on the day that the episode premieres. I just can't remember if it's Eastern or Pacific time. So I will look into that. I haven't had to look at what those details are because I haven't had an episode ready by that time, Eastern or Pacific time. So it hasn't really mattered to me. But now that I'm thinking about it, there is a limit of how early I can put this episode out. So ideally you will be getting this at noon on one of the coasts. And that's the earliest I could put it out, but I do think I'm caught up. I decided to just really lean into getting this episode done and ready because I hear you in the comments. I get that it's like you watch the episode and you want to just come hash it out and hear someone else talk about it and think about it. That's why we started this podcast, was we would do the same thing, me, Roxy, and Scarlett, at work and in our lives, of watching the episode, then talking about it together. So we started recording it, we got a podcast, and here we are. And here I am. I keep saying we like there's anyone else but me in this room right now. But Roxy and Scarlett are always kind of with us and with the iterations of what this podcast has become, especially in this episode, as I'm going to lean into some of this June and Nick stuff. In the past on this podcast, I have always been the one that has leaned more towards enjoying the Nick and June relationship more so than Roxy, for sure, who doesn't particularly care for Nick. And Scarlett kind of always played the middle of the road with us. She would, just kind of listen to us go back and forth. But I really enjoyed Nick and June's relationship because of what it did for Nick. And I think that's why I need a whole separate episode to kind of explain this June and Nick and Luke thing, and how I just feel like it's not really the love triangle that everyone keeps making it out to be. But this is a June and Nick heavy episode. We get a flashback. There's a lot going on here. I will say though, with an episode that is full of surprises and literally every scene has a surprise in it, all the way up until the end when June is very surprised. I am not entirely surprised by Nick's actions, given his motivations and the situation he has himself in as this commander of New Bethlehem, with Wharton breathing down his neck. And I don't know, he's kind of just stuck between a rock and a hard place at this point. So I'm just not surprised by what he did, because he didn't have a lot at stake to keep that plan going. Like, there was no reason for him to want that Mayday plan to succeed, or for June to continue to put herself in danger. So we'll get into it. Let's get into the episode one scene at a time. But one other overall thought before I jump into this. I hadn't quite considered it in the last episode when Janine hands the package of letters to June. But through this whole episode, these letters are kind of the impetus of everything that happens from the first scene on in this episode. So the letters are definitely important, and we've seen these kinds of letters before, and it's very cool. We talked about it on the podcast in the past when we've seen them in season 1 through season 2, when these letters go from Mayday to Moira to June to Nick. And then Luke puts them out into the world, and they have an effect in halting the foreign relation improvements that Gilead was making with Canada. So at a time now that we're seeing these foreign relations with Gilead and the rest of the world start to improve again, these letters could be important in a way in which they were before. So I don't know, we'll see what happens. June has them, and I don't know where she's going after this episode, but I'm guessing back to Mayday. I don't imagine her sticking around in Gilead for much longer, but regardless, June has these letters, and I'm guessing it's not the last that we've seen of them. But it's interesting to think about just what these letters are exactly. They're these stories from all of these women that have been affected by this regime. And essentially that's what this one Handmaid's Tale is that we're watching, and what the book was, is one woman's story, and the power in which that had. These letters are this big thing through this show, and I don't think we've seen the last of these letters yet. They've definitely caused a lot of problems within this episode, leading all the way up to what happens with June and Nick. Another thing that I really like about these letters being brought up again is, and it wouldn't be a Red Resistance podcast if I didn't bring this up and talk about the connection to the Testaments, but there is a big connection to the Testaments, just in the sense that the entire Testaments is a testament to these stories and these power of these words. And a big bulk of that story is the Ardua Hall holograph that is Lydia's kind of illicit recordings and writings of her experiences and how she got to and how she justifies what she does, right? And then you have the testimony, which isn't exactly recordings, but it's these women and their stories and the power in which they have. And the episode starts out with these letters being mentioned as June and Moira are in the trunk exiting Jezebel's. The first thing that June says to Moira is, we got to get those letters. And June's been in a trunk before. I mean, it's not like she's transported around in a trunk all the time, but we've seen her have to get into a trunk specifically and a lot of other vehicles and get transported to a location and just have trust that this is out of her control. So at this point, she's already just thinking of the next moves and what the problems are and how she can fix them. But this is probably new territory for Moira because we've definitely never seen her get in a trunk. Like, she was able to drive herself out of Canada. So we just haven't seen her have to put her faith in whoever's transporting her before. Moira is more concerned with their current plight, and June is more concerned with these letters. So Moira tells her, at least they're in a safe, we're in a trunk, and do you think we can trust this guy? And June's like, we don't have a choice. And this is the fact that June knows. At this point, there is no other option. This was the only way out, and now they have to hope that Larry is as trustworthy as June had thought that he was at one point, but her faith in him has been tested, and at this point all she can do is hope that the person that she has known and experienced is still there, and Gilead and his circumstances haven't changed him vastly. Which is interesting because it's the faith that she puts blindly into Nick that she's gonna find out was misplaced by the end of this episode. But the car stops and Larry pops the trunk and tells him to get out. And if June was worried about if she can trust him, it's at least reassuring that as soon as they start interacting, they fall back into that banter and that relationship that just, it's very familiar. Like you know, when you have like the really good friend that you don't see for a long time and you can kind of fall back into that dynamic of your relationship and all the things that you enjoyed about it. Easily, even with the space and time. And I feel like that was Larry and June in this situation. Like, they hadn't seen each other in a while. They hadn't ended things on good terms. But yet June just kind of charges at him right out of the trunk. And Moira's standing back, like, thanking him and treading very carefully because she doesn't know who she's dealing with. And June does know who she's dealing with. She treats him like someone that she trusts. So whether or not she's going to say it to Moira that she can trust him, I feel like her choice of language and the way in which she takes this conversation proves that she does trust him. And he kind of calls her out on that. You know, he comes out with his typical snarky Larry line of, I should just leave you here and see how far you get. And she's like, you know what? Do whatever you need to do. And he's like, I just saved you. And Moira's in the background going, thank you, thank you. And June flips around and says, don't you thank him. For her to have this fury towards him and lack of gratefulness for being carted out of there, she just knows she has a long leash with Larry. And so she goes right in for why she's angry with him despite him saving her from Jezebel's. And she brings up the planes because he wants to know why she's there. And she says, I'm not going to tell you. You're just going to tell your little friends. And he has to double down again on saying, I didn't have anything to do with that. They knew you were going to make a play for Hannah and they were prepared. And that is really interesting given this episode and how this episode ends, because June was so sure that Larry had sold her out at that point. And we're seeing now that she has this really unyielding devotion to Nick and this unyielding trust because of the fact that Nick has this unyielding devotion to her, right? And now I'm wondering if it wasn't Nick all along, and that would be really messed up because I can get behind him given the circumstances, selling out June and her Mayday plan in this episode with this Jezebel kill all the commanders plan. But if he directly stopped her from getting Hannah out, that would be a whole I don't know if I could defend that, because that would be his motivations for that would be really different. They would be really icky feeling, because a lot of the reason that June keeps coming back, I mean, really the only reason that June keeps coming back to Gilead, I mean, I guess it was Janine in this situation. So there's reasons she comes back, but Nick knows for sure that June's not going to stop her fight until she gets to Hannah. And at that time, New Bethlehem was just starting out, and I think Nick was really hoping that June would come back and be in New Bethlehem. But if she's able to get Hannah out, she's not going back to New Bethlehem at that point. So if that would feel icky. But that's making a lot of assumptions. It is interesting though, because Nick was the one that gets her the intel on Hannah and her location to begin with. So if he knows that June's going to make a play for Hannah, and then he goes and tips off the commanders and the military and whomever, the school, that this is going to be happening, it does just seem likely that it could have been Nick. I mean, I guess they could assume point blank that June's going to make a play for Hannah, but why would she make a play for Hannah at that point, at that location, unless it was all a trap, and it was a trap that was handed to her by Nick? Ugh. All right, but that's jumping ahead a little bit. But in this scene, Larry's doubling down on it had nothing to do with him. But June pushes back at that and says even if he didn't enact the plan, that he could have stopped it. And he whips around and says, you could have stopped Eleanor. And June is quick to be like, look, I don't expect you to forgive me for that. And she concedes that that's just kind of, there isn't anything else she can say besides, yeah, you're right. And the thing is that he has kind of always assumed that June had something to do with it, and yet has always worked with and helped June in every way from Angel's Flight on since we've seen. So it's not like he's ever really shown that he's held a lot of animosity. It's more of just been like a question of what happened, and then she was very clear about what happened. So he says in the next statement that he can't forgive himself. The what happened with Eleanor and June not stopping her, he knows for him to blame June at that point would be unfair, because he's at least owning up to the fact that Eleanor wouldn't have been in that situation if it hadn't been for him in this hellscape that he built. He just found out there's no protections for him, and he's really miscalculated the situation, and he doesn't have another play at this point. Like, this was Larry's whole hand, and he's out. He doesn't realize that he was carting around the solution to his problem in his trunk. But I love his delivery so much when he tells her this, because this is this big news, right? He's about to tell her that his days are numbered. He's going to end up on the wall. He has no allies that can help him in the situation, and no play to make to help himself. The way in which he like looks off to the side and then whips his head around as he says Warhawks, it's just such a quirky delivery of this line, and it's just what we've seen with Commander Lawrence from the moment we met him. He just has this snarky irreverence to everything that he says. This is a good place to remind people that this is how we started calling him Irreverent Larry. He was introduced in season 3 on this show, and we had started our podcast in season 3. We were always very amused in the way in which Bradley Whitford portrayed this commander, because he's very irreverent. And Scarlett started calling him Irreverent Larry, and we have since just started calling him Larry, and he's just been Larry. I can't not call him Larry. And most people on this show refer to him as Lawrence. Like in the dialogue, it's typically Lawrence, or it's Joseph occasionally with people that know him more closely, typically only Jude and Eleanor. I believe everyone else calls him Lawrence, and Larry's just short for Lawrence. So when I say Larry, I'm talking about Lawrence, and that is why. But it's these kind of lines and this kind of delivery that got us to Larry to begin with. And he tells her about how these Warhawks are going to put him on the wall, and he whips his head around, and even June's reaction is like she flinches. It's just such a strange delivery, and it's just so typical of Larry. And June is very surprised by this revelation. So he repeats it again. He says, they want to put me on the wall, June. Maybe we'll be next to each other. It just reminds me of that scene of Fred and Serena really allowing themselves the space to say exactly what they want to each other. And Fred says essentially the same thing to Serena, and he says, just my fucking luck. But you got Larry feeling like he's at the end of his road, and he's allegedly gonna help June like get out, but at this point, the fact that June's gonna end up on the wall, I mean, he's seen her continually and persistently act in a way in which is going to land her on the wall if she continues, and here they are. But June has a surprise in store for him as well. And so June just lays it out for him. She goes, what if I told you that by this time next week, all of those commanders will be dead and you'll be the most powerful commander left in Boston? And he's in the background like, June, what are you doing? And then when she finishes her statement, he says, stop it. And he's just in disbelief. He is very surprised here because it really must have felt like the walls were really closing in on him. Any chance he had at reform and changing this country and changing his legacy has dwindled to nothing. And he doesn't have another option or another play. He's pretty much accepted, or at least, I mean, he hasn't had a lot of time to process the information, and these commanders haven't had a lot of time to enact this get Lawrence on the wall plan, but he knows that he's miscalculated in such a way that he doesn't have another option. For June to just kind of pop out of nowhere with this plan on a silver platter for him is certainly the best option he has. Like, he says it to her later of, it's either your insane plan or the wall, so what other option does he have? None. So that scene ends and you get the title screen, and then we cut to June and Moira at the Lawrences going down the stairs into the basement. We've seen so much of June in this basement with all these underground dealings, and for them to be now entering with Moira in the mix is really fun to see, and it's fun to be back in the Lawrences basement full of old relics like a basketball. So I started thinking about all the things that we've seen June do in this basement and all of the ways in which she's acted against Gilead with Lawrence's help. And it's cool to see her entering this basement again with Moira by her side this time. And she's got this really kind of like intense, over the top, crazy plan. But that's all we've ever seen of June while she's working in Larry's house. And that's when I remembered that she also recorded those tapes down there. And then they start talking about these letters, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's kind of fun. It's like more of these letters and more of these stories. So in this basement where she did once record a message to Luke, and I felt like that was a big nod to the book of The Handmaid's Tale, now we have June explaining her plan to Larry, and he is trying to tell her that it's only gonna work if that she can kill them all. If you only kill one or two, they're going to keep popping up. And we've seen that, like when one commander goes down, just when you think you've avoided a problem, like another menace pops up in its place. It's like what Larry was saying earlier in the episode of Bell and Reynolds and Calhoun, that they're the worst of them, but there will be more to pop up in their place and become the worst of them, given the opportunity and the power and the access to Jezebels and etc. Larry's warning her that this is really only going to work if it really works completely. And we know that these plans never go according to plan. But June tells him that she knows that this is... But June's telling him that she understands this. And then you hear Naomi's voice. And I forgot when she started, through this whole interaction of Larry and Naomi, and he's trying to keep her away from June. Like, I'm understanding why Naomi can't see that June's there. Like, completely, like, that part of the scene I completely understood. But I completely forgot that June doesn't know anything about Naomi and Larry being married. So that's a funny surprise for her at the end of this interaction. But Naomi and Larry are funny to watch, and it must have been entirely amusing for June to see these two. She's asking him about she's like asking him what he's doing, and he's like, he's looking for a file, and then he's got a basketball in his hand, and he says something about like, oh, you didn't know I used to play? And she's like, at Harvard? And he's like, yeah. And, you know, he ushers her away, and I love how as he says, good night, sleep well, whatever he says, as she goes up the stairs, and she's kind of like taken aback and confused, but not really too concerned with whatever the hell he's doing down there. So he mumbles Jesus Christ under his breath, and And then he's got to go face June, and she's got questions because this is news to her, and I just completely forgot that she wouldn't have known this information. And she goes, Naomi Putnam, and he goes, Naomi Lawrence. And I love how I think this is the second time that they've referenced Warren Putnam without using his name. Like, both times Serena and June, when talking with Larry, were like, what happened with, and they just linger on not saying his name, and June can't even be bothered to remember his name, and Larry just calls him an impediment, and June's like, yeah, good enough. I love what they've done with any kind of legacy of Warren Putnam. Like, he's just been completely wiped off the map. Like, they won't even use his name. Larry wants to know what's next in their plan, so June asks if he is on board, and he says it's either this or the wall, so yes. And so she says that they need to get back to Mayday, and he kind of like scoffs at her request and says, I can't just gallivant across the border. And Moira jumps in there and it's like, well, you're a commander. And so he's able to tell June that he's actually a high commander now. And so June has that information. I don't think she knew that before either. But it was also a nice reminder to Larry that he does have a lot of power, and the stakes are very high for him, and he doesn't have a lot to lose. Like, he's already lost it all. So he can kind of gallivant across the border and take these extra risky moves at this point because he doesn't have anything left to lose. Whereas Nick, I think, is not in the same boat throughout this episode. We cut to Nick in the next scene as June is telling Larry that before they go across the border back to Mayday, they need to get the letters. Larry says something about like, look, Jezebel's is on lockdown. I don't have any connections with the eyes. And June's just like, give me your cell phone. But it's another sign of that unyielding faith she has that Nick's going to come through for her. So then you cut to Nick, and he's alone at his home, and he can't stop thinking about Toby and the fact that he had to kill him. And we see a little bit more of the scene that they had cut away from, of Nick just standing there as all these medics run in to try to save him. I'm not really sure what Nick did, but whatever it was, it worked. His actions are still weighing on his conscience, as you can see. And then June calls, so he tells her that he can get into the safe and get the letters, and that Larry can take Moira home, but he wants to see her. Then we see Nick at Jezebel's. He gets into the safe, no problem, and he gets the letters, but he finds the tooth on the ground, and it's gotta be a lot for Nick to start piecing together of he didn't even know that June was in Gilead. He doesn't get a call until she's in trouble, and she needs him to go get these letters. So now he has to go to Jezebel's, and we're going to see in a moment in this scene that this is going to be a problem for him and through the rest of this episode. And he doesn't know why June's there, but the room that she sends him to has a tooth. And I'm sure he must know, or he can easily find out very shortly from here, that there's a guardian that's missing. So the fact that June is mucking about in this area in ways in which Nick is not even privy to is already got to be alarming and a surprise to him. And it starts to make his decision by the end of it even a little bit more understandable, because June, he can't even protect June. Like, him working with the Americans doesn't keep June safe. She's going to be in Jezebel's with these illicit letters locked up in a safe, and a guardian missing, and a tooth on the floor. And eventually we're going to find out that June's whole plan is going to fuck up Nick's whole life even bigger. So we'll get into it later with the implications of if June's Mayday plan were to succeed, what that would mean for Nick. But here in this scene, he's already seeing that June is just constantly putting herself in perilous situations that he can't protect her from and often has to bail her out of. So he's trying to leave and have nobody see him, but he hears Belle coming around the corner, and Belle is with Janine. And Janine is playing the role that Belle wants her to play so well. And this is that growth that we're seeing in Janine. This is actually a kind of a cool episode for Janine. We do get one really great scene with her and Lydia that is very transformative for Janine and something that we just haven't got to see her do. But here, we're still seeing that Janine knows how to play the role of what Belle wants, but also as somebody working underneath the eyes of Gilead and working within all of these constraints. And she's learned to survive and be smart in ways that we haven't seen. There's been a lot of growth for Janine in this sense of her just being able to, like, even just the way that she communicates with Nick. She knows Nick is June's, and the way in which she gets the information out of Nick that she needs of, is June okay? and also plays into what Belle wants her to do. Like, she does both things so well and gets what she needs to and maneuvers through these two men in this situation so well. As you have Belle questioning Nick, I didn't think you'd come here, and Janine's like, oh no, I've seen him, like trying to vouch for him, but then Belle gets really jealous, and so Janine has to walk it back, and she laughs and says, oh, I would never, but he did have this girl that he really liked. What was her name? April, May, something like that. And she says, whatever happened to her? And he says, she was transferred out, she's okay, or she's safe. And it was so perfectly done by Janine. She gets to diffuse Belle's anger while also getting the information she needed. And so now that she knows that June made it out okay, she knows that this operation should therefore still be in effect. And the fact that she has Nick there, obviously working with June, coming to do something, she doesn't know what Nick's there for, but the fact that June was just there and Nick's confirming, yes, she's been out, it's gonna give Janine this sense of security that there is something coming, and she just has to make it through one more week. And we're going to see that with Lydia, with her scene with Lydia. She can finally say what she wants to Lydia for the first time, but we'll get to that scene later. Nick's able to sidestep Belle and Janine. They continue on, and Nick has his letters, and it feels in that moment like he might have avoided any issues with Belle, but we're going to see later that he has been seen at Jezebel's. Whether it's Belle or it's somebody else, it doesn't really matter. Nick was at Jezebel's, and Belle knows just as much as we know that Wharton is not going to be happy with this. Then we cut to Nick delivering the letters to June, and their greeting is a little stilted. They don't hug. He just says hey, and she says hey, and he goes, here, look, I got this for you. And it's just like, she says I need, and he jumps to get, and so he quickly delivers what she needs, because that's all she wants from him in this moment. Like, she's not there for a reunion. She's just like, hey, did you get my shit? I gotta go. So he hands it to her, and that's basically what she says. Like, she's like, great, thanks. And she starts moving towards the door, and he's like, hold on a second, what's going on? What are you doing? Why are you dressed like a Martha? And she's like, I'll tell you, it's a long story, I'll tell you about it in the car. And he grabs her hand to stop her from moving towards the door. And it's just, I love that for Nick and June, because Roxy really hated this part of their relationship and thought it was super weird and creepy, but I loved it. I love that they just couldn't communicate and have any kind of like normal relationship. It had to be really subtle, and everything we've seen about June and everything she had to do to operate within Gilead, where she had to learn to communicate under the surface. She has to do it with the Handmaid. She has to do it basically everywhere. And so it was just like, you would just see it a lot with Nick and June, of like these little fingers and little handholds. So it was kind of cool to see in the scene where all of their communication is failing. It's the connection of the handhold that gets June to stop and kind of see what's happening here and realize that she needs to check in with Nick for a second, because he's not doing okay, and she realizes it at this point. And so Nick tells her that Rose and her father are in DC, and asks her if she would stay overnight and he can get her back in the morning. It'll be safer that way. And that's when she realizes that there's something off, and that he needs her. And so their relationship isn't entirely transactional. Like, if she only needed him just to get her the letters and move on, and then she could, because at this point, staying here and sending Moira back is something that she's now going to have to go back and explain to Luke, which is going to make things complicated for her. So it's at least nice to see that this relationship is a little complicated in her end too, and she's willing to accept some of those complications, because she expects Nick to help her anytime she needs it, in spite of any complications to his life. So at least in this little way, I think Nick still kind of wins if we're tallying how many times he's fucked up his life to help June versus how many times she's fucked up her life to help him. But it's complicated. He's always had more of ability and station to help her, but in this moment she concedes, and she can see that he needs something, and she stays for the night, probably because she also wants to stay for the night. He's kind of handed this opportunity to her on a silver platter of, no one's at my house and you can come back with me. So she says okay, but she also can tell that there's something wrong, and she asks him if everything's okay with him. That's when we start to get these flashbacks into it looks like it must be the same night of when she shows up at his door after the forced ceremony conception of Nicole, although I don't know if that's for sure when Nicole was conceived. It could have been this moment here that we're seeing, or one of the many times. Like, we know that June goes back and sleeps with Nick multiple times, but this, we start getting a flashback into the morning after of one of their nights together at the Waterford house. And it was kind of jarring to flashback to June in her handmaid clothes because we just haven't seen it in so long. So that glimpse of red was kind of jarring. And I love this flashback because it really highlights what I love about June and Nick's relationship. This was just a place of escape for her. And like the only time that she gets some kind of sense of normalcy and agency, and you see it all in the scene of her coming in and she gets to take off her clothes and let her hair down and kind of like literally disrobe all of Gilead and leave it behind in this little space for her and Nick to just kind of have this escapism and this moment for each other. So I've seen a lot of pushback about Nick in general, like kind of coming off as an incel, especially now as we're getting a bigger picture of Nick, and I can see it. I can even see it in the scene with this flashback. But I just know that given what we've seen of Nick and his flashbacks and his history, we just haven't seen any other relationship, any other girl. So it's safe to assume that this is probably one of his first relationships, and he hasn't had a whole lot of interaction with other women, which, okay, fine. Like, I hear myself as I'm saying, it feels a little incelish in this scene, and Nick comes off like an incel. But I think that his like needing, I just feel like it's just more of that validation of wanting to know if this connection that the two of them have is simply just for June, like any port in the storm, which Roxy always liked to describe their relationship as, or if there is more of a connection. And so he tries to say he would be nobody to June outside of this context. And she really doubles down on, you'd still be you, I would still find you attractive, you would still be nice, you would still be brave, you would still be all these things that I already like about you. And he kind of gets that validation from her, and you see the seeds of their relationship starting to grow. And their relationship is just so complicated within the context of Gilead and within the Waterford's house, and the fact that June is married, which I think is a big part of Nick needing this validation, is the fact that June married somebody else and she never divorced him. She never wanted to be split up from him. She was pulled apart from him and is now only with Nick because of these set of circumstances. And I think that's what Nick is really trying to bring out in this conversation. And I think June does, obviously June does a good enough job of convincing him that in any context they would have found each other, because we see for the rest of the series that Nick doubles down on his feelings for June, and I don't think if he didn't feel like they were returned, then I think he would have been able to separate himself from June at some point. But I think we're just seeing the seeds of their beginning of their consensual relationship here, in a glimpse of the normalcy and the way in which they tried to apply some normalcy to a very abnormal situation. And it gets very complicated down the road as Luke comes back into the picture. But at this point in their relationship, like, Luke isn't an option to contend with because he's so far away and so inaccessible. Now, currently with Nick, we're seeing that he's needing a lot more validation from June, as it feels like she chose Luke. And he's quite literally just reaching out to her in this scene as this flashback kind of plays across his mind to ensure that that connection is still there. And I love how the last shot of the flashback is a shot of June and Nick kissing with the light from the sun kind of pouring in over them. And it's a really interesting juxtaposition to the last scene in the episode when June's in the closet, technically with Nick, but by the last shot you can't even see him. He's in the dark so much, and it's just June bathed in the light from the cracks in the wall. So I just noticed that in the rewatch of like them together, because it's very, very clear that that last shot is Nick like out of the picture, out of the shot, in the dark, gone, snuffed out of existence in June's mind given that information at the end of the scene. But we'll get there. But the next scene that we cut to is Janine and Lydia. And Lydia is at Jezebel's and she's waiting for Janine. And she sees the picture. The first shot is of Lydia looking at the picture that Charlotte drew and Larry had passed off to Janine. It's like sitting on her vanity there. And Janine enters and Lydia says, "Janine, I brought you cookies for my girls, oatmeal raisin." And I was laughing so hard every time I was taking notes through this weekend. And I was laughing so hard because through my work week, I go to work and then I come home and I take notes for the episode and kind of just rewatch the episode, rewatch other episodes that make me think of things. Like, that's my process while I'm working and doing podcast things. It's kind of my note taking and my watching sessions. And so, because I get home from work usually like midnight, and so it's a good way to like unwind from work. But my work wife made me cookies this week, and it made me laugh because my work wife, I've only ever mentioned my work husband once on this podcast, and then he went and got married, and I work with his wife as well, so I gained a work wife, and she is an excellent baker, and she made me oatmeal butterscotch cookies, and they're my favorite. This podcast is entirely been fueled by oatmeal butterscotch cookies, and it makes me laugh every time I get to this Lydia scene because she's got her oatmeal cookies too. But she has raisin, and we're going to see by the end of this scene that Janine is not interested in her goddamn cookies. But work wife, I loved my cookies. Thank you. And when Janine enters, she does say thank you, but you can just tell from her body language and the way that she like throws the cookies onto the vanity that she just isn't interested in entertaining Lydia and her bullshit any longer. That's what I love so much about this scene, is the fact that Janine gets to take that veil off and say exactly how she feels about Lydia and about her situation. Janine takes the cookies and she's ready to just go back. She says thanks, she tosses them down, and she says she has to get back. And Lydia says, don't worry, you're not going to have to be here for much longer. And you can see Janine's reaction of like, what did you do, is just so accurate, because she already said to Lydia before, like, every time you try to help, you make things worse. And Janine is on the brink of being freed. You've got Lydia here mucking things up again. So Lydia tells Janine about the plan in New Bethlehem and how she'll be able to retire as a free woman. And Janine just laughs at her and says, "Free? Yeah, right." And Lydia starts to get really frustrated, and she's like, "Do you have any idea the risk I'm taking to try to help you?" And Janine starts to get really cocky in her delivery as Lydia is getting more frantic in the fact that Janine is not complying easily. Like, she thinks at this point this should be an easy sell, and she's got good news for her. And Janine isn't playing the part that she wants her to play anymore, because what we've seen in that last scene with Belle was that Janine knows how to play different roles at different times really well. And she's learned how to do that in her years and in these situations in Gilead. And so now to see her with Lydia, and she can finally drop the role that she's had to play with her for so many years and just unleash on her the fury that she's had to push back and push back and push back in order to survive amongst Lydia and under Lydia for all these years. And so she starts to tell her, like, "I don't need your help." And Lydia starts to get really frustrated, and she's like, "Go ahead then, what's your plan?" And Janine tells her this country is going to crumble. And Lydia tells her, "I'm trying to get you a way out." And that's when you get the line from the trailer where Janine says, "There is no way out." And she tells her about the commanders. She goes, "Those commanders up there, they don't want me out, they want me on my knees." And we know that that's like a really sensitive spot for Lydia, but also like she slut shamed the hell out of Janine in the beginning and told her that it was her fault for this gang rape. And now she's at Jezebel's and Lydia's trying to get her out. And she's like, "This is the world that I live in. Like, this is the reality despite what you want the reality to be, Lydia." And we've talked a lot about how there's going to be a turning point for Lydia in this series moving into the Testaments. And what I'm seeing now is it's not a turning point. It's like a very, very slow shift. Like, I feel like what we're going to see, there's a line that Serena says later in the episode to June about progress comes in fits and starts. And I feel like change and revelation and understanding the situation comes in fits and starts for Lydia. There is no one specific turning point. It's just like over and over again, her having to understand that this world doesn't work the way she thinks it does. And her protections of these girls are not at all what she thinks they are. And then Janine follows that up with, Jesus Christ, Lydia, how could you be so blind? And I think it's a combination of like using the Lord's name in vain, which I'm sure Lydia is very offended by, on top of the fact that she's losing control of Janine. She can feel it in this conversation. It's going completely different than the way that she expected it to go. And that loss of control, coupled with that Jesus Christ, prompts her to just slap her across the face. And she instantly regrets it. But we've seen Lydia do this over and over again, specifically with Janine, of just like unleashing this physical fury onto her when Janine doesn't comply. I mean, she's missing an eyeball, so we saw that to begin with. And then she wails on her in front of everybody at the Putnam's house when Janine asks to come back as a handmaid when she's brought back from the colonies. So it isn't really that surprising to see Lydia slap Janine across the face at this point, because everything she's saying is just too true for Lydia, and she needs her to just stop, and that's the only way she can get her to stop. And so as soon as she slaps her, she's like, oh, I'm sorry, like, I don't know where this came from. And it's like, no, Lydia, we've seen this enough from you, we know where this came from. And she quickly tries to apologize and ask Janine to forgive her for all of it. So Janine says, if you want my forgiveness, give me my daughter back. Lydia says, that's not possible. Angela's the daughter of a high commander. And Janine jumps in there and she goes, her name is Charlotte. And then Janine finally gets to unburden herself of the fact that Lydia literally took her child from her and placed her in Naomi's hands, and has used this child as a pawn to get Janine to obey since then. And we've talked about how Janine is no longer under the guise of Gilead or Lydia, and the control in which Lydia had kind of brainwashed her in the beginning to get her to comply. She's seen enough and had enough experiences within Gilead and outside of Lydia's grasp to understand the situation for what it is. And this is the first time that she gets to really hold Lydia to this and say, you stole my child. It was you. You took that child from me. It's my child. You say it. Say it's my child. And she really tries to appeal to Lydia's sense of reality and the fact that she can't also be as brainwashed as she's appearing to be. And she goes, Lydia, somewhere deep down inside of you, you know it. And you took her from me. And I love how she uses Lydia's words when she says, she's my girl. Say it. She's my girl. And Lydia always wants Janine to just fall in line because she's her special girl. For Janine to turn the tables on Lydia and say, this is my girl, and you took her from me, and this is what I want. You want to make it up to me? Give me my girl back. And once Janine starts to accuse Lydia of stealing her child, it just starts to flow out of her, and she pushes Lydia right out the room as she continues to tell her, you stole her from me, you stole her from me. It's like she's been holding this in and not been able to say that out loud since Charlotte has been born, in the way in which she's able to just tell Lydia exactly how she feels, and she doesn't have to filter herself to appease Lydia and all of Lydia's sensitivities. She can just tell her, and she can also just push her right out of the room. Like, she really overpowers her in every sense at the end of the scene and pushes her right out the door. And she's not even done there, and she comes back, and it's like really cool to see Janine be able to just rage in this room. Like, we've seen so many of these handmaids get these opportunities to vent out all of this frustration that they have to stuff down all the time. So to see in this space where she knows that there's a window of hope so close around the corner, and she got to just say everything that she wants to Lydia, and she's just not done yet with like letting all of that energy out of her. And she gets to throw something at the wall, and she clears the vanity full of stuff. It was just really nice to be able to see her have that space. And she kind of just takes a moment after she gets to release all that energy, and she laughs for a little bit. She gives this one little chuckle, and then she walks out of the room, and it wasn't defeated at all. As she exited, it just felt more of like she was ready, like she said all that she can say to Lydia, and she's ready to walk away from the situation. But there is always going to be that same issue that June has of escaping Gilead means leaving your child behind. And Lydia has point blank told her, like, I can't get you your child. And so Janine has to take this escape. She has to get out. And she's going to have to accept that she will never be able to see her child again in the same way that June had to. And Janine has always been able to have access to Charlotte. So that is kind of a big ask of Janine. But she sees the situation for what it is. She doesn't have a future here at Jezebel's, and she probably will never see Charlotte again anyway if her plight continues. And I imagine we're going to see exactly how her plight's going to continue now that Jezebel's is gone. I don't know what's going to happen with Janine next, but I'm sure it's not great, although hopefully Lydia is going to step in at this point and get her over to the New Bethlehem. I don't know. But we'll see what happens with Janine. It was just in this moment for her to be thinking that her escape is coming and that she can't get to her child. There's going to have to be that level of acceptance that she's going to have to leave her child behind too. Then we cut to Nick and June arriving at Nick's house. And as soon as he pulls in, he sees that Wharton is still there. He says, oh shit, my father-in-law's here. And he tells June to stay in the car. And if he's not back in 5 minutes, then she is to go to Serena's. And that's another surprise for June as she finds out that Serena's living right up the street. So he tells her what number the house is and that she'll keep June safe. So then we cut to inside of Nick's house. Wharton is waiting for him and he sits down at the desk as if this is his office and his desk, and Nick sits at the other side preparing to be interrogated. And it's just funny that despite this being Nick's house, there is no pretense about who has more power here. So Wharton starts to interrogate Nick. Nick asks him, like, I thought you were supposed to be in DC, and Wharton's like, got a call at the airport. And I thought it was kind of funny that the first thing that Nick repeats is the airport. And I'm like, Nick, that was not the operative word in that sentence. Like, that's not the question there. But then he follows it up with why. And Wharton asks him if he was downtown. And Nick explains he was downtown working on some business for the Eyes and that he was at Jezebel's. And Wharton's like, good, at least we have some honesty. Nick knows he has to be honest because he can't lie about it at this point because he doesn't know how much Wharton knows. And Wharton wants to know what the investigation was that brought Nick to Jezebel's. And Nick tries to sidestep it by saying that it's confidential. And then Wharton brings up the last investigation that Nick had that he was working on and how the only witness ends up dead right after Nick goes to visit him. And Nick responds with, that was a terrible tragedy. And Wharton corrects him and says it's a terrible coincidence. And Wharton pauses for a second. He really gives this like very labored, pregnant pause as Nick waits for his next response. And you can just kind of feel the tension building and building. He finally says to Nick, I don't know what you've gotten yourself into. And Nick tries to tell him that he hasn't gotten himself into anything. And he starts to laugh as he says it. And Wharton just erupts, and it makes Nick jump, and it made me jump, and all I could think of was Serena run. That was like 0 to 100 in 1 second, and I mean, if you're gonna make Nick jump, like, that was just jarring, and this is the man that Serena is marrying. And it's the first time that we've seen a crack in the very cool and calm and collected facade and kind demeanor of Wharton. And we're seeing this much more furious side. There's a lack of self-control happening right there. Or he's trying to scare the shit out of Nick, which he does do very effectively. Then Wharton gets up and he gets right in Nick's face and he says, these lies are going to land you on the wall and your son is going to end up fatherless. Is that what you want? And Nick says, of course not. And he says, then I want to help you, but I need the truth. And then they cut, and that's the end of the scene. And by the end of the episode, we know what happens after this. But if you had to guess at this point what happens after this, it's just not that much of a surprise that he's going to give away this plan because he's stuck. Wharton's got him in a trap because he already was skeptical of him before with the investigation of the Guardians being shot in no man's land. He walks right into that trap that Wharton sets from him and goes to the hospital and kills the only living witness. And now he's been seen at Jezebel's and he has to explain that. And there's already been weird things happening at Jezebel's. There's a guardian missing. The place is on lockdown. And now Nick has to explain why he's been there. What happens if he doesn't? What happens if he sidesteps this and comes up with any excuse that works with Wharton to explain what his investigation is, or to say that he's investigating the Guardian's death and to mislead Wharton in any way, or to just not give up this Mayday plan entirely. But Nick needs this Mayday plan to not go off because I don't think so. Nick wouldn't have had a chance to talk with Larry yet, so he doesn't know that Larry's pretty much at the end of his rope, quite literally. Like, if Nick was privy to that information, then there might be a little bit more reason for him to want all of these commanders dead. He can step into that void of power that Larry's going to step into, and they can step into it together, except that's only in Boston, and you still have all these DC commanders. And who's going to be there in the DC commanders? Belle's father. And if Belle gets murdered, he's definitely going to want answers. And the only two that aren't killed in Boston are Nick and Larry. That's going to put huge targets on their back and suspicion amongst these DC commanders. And you already have Wharton that's already highly suspicious of Nick. If this goes down the way it's supposed to, it's going to make them look really suspicious, especially since this whole plan goes into effect and is able to be enacted because of New Bethlehem and the new trade route. They're using the new trade route to infiltrate Gilead to begin with. So all of a sudden, Larry and Nick, the two biggest proponents of New Bethlehem, have now stepped into complete power in Boston because every other commander has just been slaughtered because of this New Bethlehem trade route. That's going to be an insurmountable amount of attention on Larry and Nick to have to maneuver and survive with these incredibly powerful DC commanders. Like, it's been alluded to several times that Belle's father has a whole lot of power, and Wharton seems to be aligned at least equally with him, if not just morally more righteous, quote unquote. And then on top of that, you have June working with Mayday, and every time she comes into Gilead, she ends up getting herself into a situation in which she needs Nick to come bail her out, and he needs her to stop doing that. So if he can put an end to this Mayday plan here and have Jezebel's be closed down, then Mayday cannot continue to operate with that plan, and June, at least for the time being, will not be in Gilead messing up all of Nick's plans, because every time that June needs him, he has to put himself at a risk that he wouldn't otherwise put himself in. Then we cut to June in the driveway, in the car, trying to figure out if Nick is coming and at what point she has to flee. And it was interesting because we know that that's a struggle that June considers throughout this entire series. Is they waited too long to get out the first time, and then when they're in Canada and they have to flee again, she's telling Luke, like, we waited too long last time and we have to leave. We have to go now. And it was kind of like this little microcosm of that same decision. It's clear that she doesn't want to go seek out Serena. She doesn't want to catch up with her while she waits for Nick to deal with the situation. I mean, she would obviously prefer it if Nick would just come out of the house and they could sidestep this whole Wharton situation. But she has to go because after 5 minutes, Nick's going to be expecting her to be gone. And for all she knows, Wharton and Nick could be coming out of that house together, and she needs to not be sitting in his car any longer. I did consider that if she didn't want to go to Serena, she could just try the trunk and see how long she lasts there. But then I'm like, that's still really stupid. If at any point she gets caught with Wharton, they're fucked, like extra fucked. Like, she's got to get the fuck out of there. She's got to go to Serena. So she does. And she takes her mask down so at least Serena can see her face and she's not just looking like some random Martha knocking on the door. So at least June has the wherewithal to do that. And she's walking down the street. She keeps looking over her shoulder to see if Nick's going to maybe come out. And he doesn't. So she goes and knocks on the window, and Serena gets the surprise that June is in town. But I love the image of Serena sitting in her PJs, in her pretty pink PJs. She's still in pink. And she's in her cute little house in New Bethlehem, and she's just writing away. And it's like she has this perfect little Serena-fied life, which is exactly what June's going to call her out on later, of this is only perfect for you. But it is perfect for her here while she's single. And at peace. Like, this is so peaceful for her and so much exactly what she should be wanting. And instead, she's about to go marry Wharton. And we just came off the scene where we see that he has this really violent temper. And all I can think of is like, Serena, you're going to fuck up all of your peace for this man. And it's not to say that she doesn't deserve to have her peace fucked up. It's just that watching her make these decisions over and over again, knowing what we know about her relationship with Fred and how quickly she's falling into this marriage with Wharton. And June's going to call her out in this scene here of like how stupid that is and how much she's falling for this man that she's only known for a half a second. You know, she's going to say later that he was different than Fred. But when you see this first shot of Serena in her house at night all by herself, she's going to be like, oh, Serena, this should be enough for you. Take this as a win. This is a huge win. And Serena wants answers as to why June is dressed as a Martha showing up in the middle of the night at her house. And obviously June isn't going to tell her the reality of the situation, so she tells her that she's there to see if Nick wants to come to Alaska with her so they could try to be a family. And Serena goes, no. And June's like, well, you know, I wanted to see if I want him to be in our daughter's life and in my life too. And Serena's like, well, what did he say? And June says, you know, he wants to stay with Rose. And Serena's like, so you came here? And she's like, and June says, yeah, I needed somewhere to go and I needed someone that I could trust. And Serena's like, you trust me? And you can just see it in her face that she wants so bad for June to confess that she trusts her and to have this connection with this person that she so long tried to forge a connection with, despite the terrors that they're about to talk about. This conversation was just so great. So Serena says, you trust me? And June's like, well, I must. This is where I landed. And we know that the implications were not that she was seeking out Serena by any means. Nick told her this is where trust is, and so that's where she landed. Not that she had a whole lot of other options. And then June brings up the train, and Serena's like, no, thank you. You saved me from that mob. And June's like, okay. And there's like this brief pause where Serena kind of considers her. And there's something else in the air because we've seen it since June has had to process and contend with what happened on that train and hearing the news about Serena and that she survived and that she's back in Gilead. And just what is this connection in this relationship that they have? And I think we get to the heart of the matter later in the scene when June says, I just want to get rid of you. I wish I could forgive you because I just want to get rid of you. And I feel like that was such a symbolical getting rid of Serena by pushing her off that train. And I feel like that's what Serena's trying to read here, is how much of that was June saving her and how much of that was June really just trying to rid herself of everything that Serena is and that she represents in June's life. Then Serena starts to explain to June why her request was so outlandish, and she's like, you know, Nick's got a baby that's due in a couple months, and what does your husband have to say about this? You must know that this request is selfish and would be uncomfortable for everyone. And it's such a funny line coming from Serena. She says, I had to pay for your love affair. I'm like, Serena, come on, be serious. But I think that is a real accurate glimpse into how Serena still hasn't fully accepted even what she was in prison for in Canada, or that she could have walked away from all of that before she ever even met the Wheelers. But here we are. She's in New Bethlehem and she's trying to bring on reform, and she's about to get married. And then June hits her with the same line that she said to Moira of, I just don't think we should be comparing our suffering. But with Serena, she follows it up with, or who was the cause of it? Because we know exactly who was the cause of it, Serena. And Serena gets it at that point. And June says, I just need a place to stay until Nick can get me across the border in the morning. And Serena wants to know if anyone else knows that she's here and reminds her that she will be in a lot of trouble for harboring a known fugitive. And June says, I know, but Gilead thinks I'm in Alaska. I came as a Martha and no one saw me, which is kind of true. She leaves out the Larry part and the Janine part, but fine, fair enough. And her final statement is, and you owe me. And I think what she means by this is the fact that she kind of lays it out for her later of, I helped you give birth to your son. I saved your life. So, and she saved her life twice, like on the train and after she gave birth to Noah, because she was going to die on the side of the road and wherever that little shack is that they gave birth. So I'm sure that that is what she means by "you owe me," but I still really, really wanted a very specific payoff for the owing. That like, it's hard because Serena just kind of owes June in general, point blank, at any point. If June needs something, Serena should do it because it owes her. And that statement kind of just stands on its own, and pick any of the many reasons why Serena would owe it to June to help her. But there was one very specific time when June gave Serena something that she wanted. And it's in season 3 when Serena is trying to see Nicole. And in order to do that, June has to call Luke and see if they can arrange a meeting. And it's an incredibly uncomfortable situation to put June in. Again, thinking about how Serena just tried to say that June should have considered how uncomfortable it is for everyone. Like, this situation was incredibly uncomfortable for Luke and June, and Serena put them in it just so that she could see this child that is not hers. So, Serena, again, ugh. But June concedes to that because she had just started working with the Martha Network, and she's realizing that she does have some power and some ability to have some effect within this household at Larry's. She concedes it to Serena as long as Serena knows that she owes her. And I thought that was very, very smart play because Serena had enough power and influence where that was a really great favor for June to have in her back pocket. And the only thing I can think of where we saw that payoff was when later in that season, when June is basically having a mental breakdown in the hospital while she sits bedside with Natalie. Serena comes in and June swipes at her with a scalpel, and Serena gets her help instead of turning her in. And that's the best I could see for that like immediate payoff. So as soon as June said, "you owe me," I'm like, yes, you do. But I don't really think that's what she means. I think she means you owe me because I saved your life like a million times. And the fact that I haven't killed you at all is reason enough for you to owe me. Then they cut to the next scene, and Serena is helping June get situated in a bedroom. And that's interesting in and of itself because we've just seen, this entire series is about what happened to June in this bedroom in the Waterford's house, and now she's in Serena's house, and everything should feel different, but she's going to point it out to her very shortly that this isn't really different at all. This is just a prettier, better version for Serena of Gilead, which is really accurate. I hadn't quite seen it exactly like that until June said it, and I'm like, oh my god, she's so right. But first, Serena turns to June, and she's like, we just keep getting thrown back together. It seems God has a design for us. And June tells her, I wish he would do other things. And Serena can't even read the room. She kind of just continues on with her news of getting married. And you can tell she really wants to tell June this, and that she's excited, and that she's expecting this to be well received, or for June to be excited for her. And she's kind of taken aback when June's not, especially when June's first response is, "So you're going to be Nick's mother-in-law?" And Serena's like all flushed and giddy and smiling as she's like, well, I hadn't really thought about it like that. I feel like Serena must have at least been expecting a little pushback from June, or she at least reads June's face correctly, which Serena doesn't always do well. And so June says, okay, Mrs. Wharton. And Serena really quickly jumps in there and says, he's not like Fred. And June asks her if Fred was like Fred in the beginning. And we know from that flashback earlier this season of Serena in the beginning of her relationship with Fred that she was really swept up by him and then swept into this mess that she's in because of that. And June can see it for what it is. And Serena, I think, doesn't want to see what June's forcing her to see at this point. But Serena's really quick to defend that the situation is different, or at least you can hear the things that Serena is telling herself about why this relationship is different, and now she's just echoing that to June as she says, Gabriel is different, he built me a library, we're going to reform Gilead together. And June says, he sounds like quite the catch. And Serena's like, you disapprove? June says, no, I'm just surprised. Hey, surprised. And June says, I really thought you changed. And Serena is trying so hard to show June that she has changed. And June says, you're still subjugating yourself to a powerful man, Serena. You're still going to work for Gilead. And she says, Gilead is not New Bethlehem. And that's when June says to her, Serena, just because women can read here doesn't mean that they're free. It's just a better version for you. And she says, if you truly believe that this is Gilead, then saying that to the one person that's trying to protect you would be awfully foolish. And I can't figure out June's reaction at this. At first, I feel like it looked like she was very disappointed that Serena didn't surprise her here by wielding the power that she does have. I feel like June might have initially felt that way as like a knee jerk reaction because it's so expected of Serena for her to just lash out if you hold her feet to the fire too directly. And the intensity in this conversation is getting higher and higher. But I do think that June could see the truth in what Serena was saying of the two of them can kind of unleash how they feel about each other, and this is kind of a quote unquote safe space for them to do it, and for her to do it without, like, she knows there won't be repercussions within this room with these conversations that she's having with Serena. So that much of it is true, and I think she does kind of concede that, and she says okay. And that's when Serena hits her with that change takes time, progress comes in fits and starts. And it's the first time that I realized how annoyed I should be with Serena and this New Bethlehem reform plan with the handmaids that she has, because it's not even close to the amount of progress she should be making with these handmaids and their plight in Gilead. Instead, she's just saying, once you've gone through all the horrors of being a handmaid, at least you don't have to go to the colonies. You can come here to New Bethlehem and help this fertility center and all that encompasses, which it's unclear to me if there's any handmade, like, is it a handmade placement center or is it more of like a in vitro fertilization situation? Like, I don't know what this fertility center does exactly, but whatever it is, the handmaids retiring there isn't enough based on what Serena should know, given her experiences specifically as a handmaid for the Wheelers, and with her trying to make amends to June. Like, it's just not enough. It's not until I see I think it's going to be like a couple of scenes later from here when June sees the picture of Fred and the baby and Serena, and that's got to be Nicole, right? Oh God. So she sees a picture of Nicole and Serena talking about the handmaids and blah blah blah, and she's going to unveil this fertility center and the handmaids get to retire there, and it's just such a slap in the face to June. And I'm like, holy shit, this just isn't enough. Like, for Serena to say progress comes in fits and starts like that, when we know that the progress that Serena doubled down on in that movie theater of enacting was not a fits and starts progress. That was a massive undertaking of a coup of the United States government. And she was okay with all of that horror because of the progress that was going to be made, quote unquote. And the ideology that she had of this is what the world needs. So for her to be trying to walk back and undo all of what she set forth with that decision, and with her getting in bed with Sons of Jacob and using her platform to perpetuate their message, or them taking her message and distorting it to perpetuate their motives, like, either way, Serena and Sons of Jacob and Fred all got intertwined. And we see in the movie theater, Fred's kind of taken aback by the weight of all the implications of what that attack is that they just got approved for, as he discusses it with Serena in the movie theater flashback. Serena says, no, this is what we need. She reassures Fred that this is the right thing. This is what the world needs. So I don't know. I just got really bothered by her thinking that these little steps of progress forward and these little changes are enough, when she knows that in order to have the change that you want to see, it's got to be a big explosion or a big attack. There has to be this grander thing than this small reform of, at least the handmaids don't go to the colonies or Jezebels, they get to go to New Bethlehem. But it's still Gilead, and they still have to be handmaids first. They still don't get to keep their children. Like, I don't know why Serena would be okay with any of those things, given her revelations of what being a mother is now that she's actually experienced it. But they reach an impasse in their argument as Serena says, and who are you to judge? You're here to break up a marriage. And I love June's response. And she's like, you got me. And her face is just so perfect. As the outrage and the audacity of Serena to have that statement given everything that they've been through. And Serena understands what June's face is saying there. And she's like, oh, I know I was awful once. And June's like, once? And that's the thing. We've seen so many instances of Serena being awful. And for her to boil it down to there was one time, I'm like, what one time would you be referring to? What was the one time you were awful? I'm actually really curious to know what she thinks that one time was. Can't even boil it down. I can't even make a good guess because there's so many times that were so awful in so many different ways. Like so many different ways. We've got all the times in which she used Hannah against June. The fact that she tried to take Nicole and continued to try to take Nicole and forced June to be away from Nicole sooner than she should have been, or sooner, shouldn't have been at all, but sooner than even Gilead protocol. And then when she's in the house, she wouldn't let her near the child, on top of the rapes, so many rapes. But the most egregious rape of all, the one that she was pregnant, that was outside of the ceremony. So but Serena, what one time are you referring to? And Serena really wants to know why June came, because Serena is desperate for some kind of forgiveness from June. And she says it she says, I keep trying. And she says, I keep trying and trying to make amends to you. What do you want from me? And June is like, don't you think I want to forgive you so I can finally get rid of you? So then Serena's like, then what do you want from me? And June's like, a bed, I told you. And that's it. Fine, here's your bed. And she leaves. So the next scene is June waking up in the morning at this room at Serena's. And it's got to be just such a weird feeling to be waking up in Gilead. She just said New Bethlehem's just a prettier, more Serena-fied version of Gilead. And we don't see her sleeping or not sleeping one way or the other, but it looks like she slept through the night and was able to sleep relatively peacefully. There has to be some kind of sense of trust and security for her to sleep well in this household, in this country, given everything that she had just said to Serena. But I think it really just highlights the faith she has in Nick, knowing that Nick knows she's there, and therefore if she runs into any trouble, he's going to be able to get her out of it, which really doubles down on the shock and surprise she's going to have by the end of the episode. But Serena has more surprises in store for June, and she comes in to tell her that she made her breakfast, and she has this smug look on her face, and we know that she has this surprise in store, but she also, it just reminds me of how much she really wants to prove to June that she is a better Christian than June. And so she's trying to turn the other cheek, forget about everything that was said the night before, and continue to make amends to June. So she delivers up Rita for her. And it definitely also reminds me of the surprise party that she threw for June when June was pregnant with all the handmaids. And it was like, look, have this get together. Why don't you talk amongst yourselves? And Serena's just so bad at doing these kinds of events and facilitating these kinds of surprises. And this one was better, I suppose. There's growth here, but it was not great. So June goes downstairs and she sees Rita, and Rita tells her right off the rip, I found my sister. And June turns to Serena and asks if it's safe, and Serena assures her that it is and tells them to sit down. So they take the seat at this table, and it's so cool to see these three characters back together again. It's been a long time since we've seen the three of them have a conversation, and there's just so much history there, and it's really interesting to see that they're all in these new roles and how these new roles affect the conversation. And Serena's presence is just uncomfortable because you've got these two characters, June and Rita, who know each other so well and have such a closeness and a real friendship and a real camaraderie. And then there's this stilted relationship of this forced connection with Serena. While it's something that neither of them can walk away from for different reasons, and those reasons have brought them all into this room again together, there is not an equal playing field of three friends getting together. This is Serena and two friends getting together, and you can see it with the way they're looking at each other. And they don't even have, they don't get a chance to have a real conversation until Serena leaves the room. The first thing Serena says, she steps right in it when she goes, well, Rita works here now. I got her a job at the bakery. And June goes, you don't say. And she looks over at Rita, and Rita just kind of looks over at her like, June, just drop it. It's not worth it. And Serena is oblivious to all of this happening, and she continues and she goes, "Oh, Rita, I've been meaning to ask you if you would make the cake for my wedding." And before she can even respond, June jumps in with, she doesn't have to do that. And Rita tries to be like, I can respond, but Serena's already responding to June. And she says, I know that she doesn't have to do that. You can attend the wedding as a honored guest and nothing more. And then everyone just sits in an awkward silence. And it's like, Serena is just so bad at doing this. She just can't read a room, and she just doesn't have a genuine connection with these people. So it's going to feel very forced, because it is very forced, and it's very evident how forced it is the second that Noah starts to cry and Serena has to excuse herself. So once Serena exits, they get a chance to speak to each other, and they're like, hi. And Rita goes, you came back for Nick? And you could tell that she's surprised by this information. And June goes, no, I came back for Mayday. And Rita's like, oh yeah, like that makes a lot more sense. Like I should have figured out that you weren't going to tell Serena why you were really here, and that you wouldn't come back into Gilead just to see Nick. But I don't know, I think she kind of would. And I don't think it's wildly surprising to Rita that June would go back to see Nick. It's interesting. Rita has an interesting perspective, because she has seen June's relationship in Gilead with Nick and Luke's relationship with June in Canada. So, she would have, I would love to hear more of Rita's take on June's two men in her life. June is really quick to tell Rita that now that she's here, Mayday could use her help on the inside. And Rita is not in a position to want to fight for Mayday, and she hasn't been since she got out of Canada. And I'm not entirely sure why June thinks that anything would have changed for Rita at this point, but I guess June's just kind of catching up with a lot of different people, and things have changed for people, so I guess she's just testing the waters. But Rita is quick to remind her, she's like, I just got reunited with my sister, and you make it look so easy going back in and fighting for Mayday. And June's like, well, you know, I have Hannah. And June concedes that Rita finding her sister is worth protecting that relationship and that connection, instead of fighting for Mayday and sacrificing that. And so at least June can acknowledge that for Rita, just the fact that she's been reunited with her sister can and should be enough, and she deserves this chance to be able to see her sister. And I didn't talk about it before, but her sister looks like she's an Econo wife, which obviously Gilead's not great for anybody, but it doesn't seem like her sister is in like extreme immediate threat. She probably has a husband and a family. It seems like they have stayed under the radar of Gilead. They've kind of at least been able to survive. Now that these sisters have been reconnected, there isn't going to be a whole lot of motivation to disrupt the system that connected them and to put that connection at risk. But unfortunately, Rita doesn't know all the information that we know, and she doesn't realize that New Bethlehem is a trap. And I'm wondering if when she does find that information out, if that will change her decision to go in, and if she'll end up fighting for Mayday in the end. I kind of feel like that's where we're going with Rita, but at the same time, we've never seen, like, from the moment she got into Canada, she's been trying to find some peace for herself and to forge a new life. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised if she maintains that for the rest of this series. But I think she's going to come to a realization that there isn't a way to live within Gilead. It has to be snuffed out. I'm not sure where Rita's going to go from here, but it's clear that she wouldn't have changed her motivations to fight for Mayday at this point, given her reunion with her sister. And June sees that in this conversation. Then we cut to Larry teaching Charlotte how to play chess. And this scene I want to love, because I love the whole chess situation with Charlotte, but I feel like it's a little ominous that he comes off as so assured that this Mayday plan is going to work out the way it is, when we know by the end of the episode it's out the window. And Larry just seems to be miscalculating a lot. He's miscalculating, and he's not even realizing it until it's too late that he's miscalculating. He's not even like treading carefully. He's really putting all his eggs in this basket and doubling down on his plans. And we've already seen that one has gone wrong. And so to see him be so sure about this Mayday plan that he already told June was insane is a little ominous. But so the scene starts out with him and Charlotte playing by themselves, and he's explaining how a knight is not one of the more fancy pieces, but it can get the job done or something. And he said that a skilled player like yourself, Angela, will know this. And she was like giggling, and she's just adorable, this little actress. I think it's actually twins. I want to say I saw that. So Naomi walks in and she's really outraged by the chess situation happening. And Larry is very flippant about it of don't you worry, because Naomi's very right to point out that this is it's gonna put ideas in her head and therefore reflect poorly on them as a household. And he says, you're not gonna have to worry about that. Don't you worry, you'll see. And he makes another move and he knocks over the king and checkmate. And it's just clear that Larry thinks he's got this in the bag, and we know he doesn't. So I don't know. I wish he would consider the possibility that something is going to go awry and have some kind of backup plan working. But I imagine once they find out that Jezebel's is shut down, there will be just the fact that June and Larry have the same motivations at this point. Like, if he's going to put all his eggs in some basket, at least it's June's basket. He just does seem to have a whole lot of trust that she's going to see this plan through. But he's seen her do crazier things before, so I guess it shouldn't be surprising that he's going to be surprised by the end of this episode. So then we cut to the next scene, and June is back in the guest room just waiting for Nick to come bring her back across the border. And so she's alone and she's looking through Serena's stuff, and she finds what I think she was writing in earlier. She finds something she was writing. It seems like it's some little speech about this fertility center in New Bethlehem that she'll be giving. And there's a picture of Fred and her and Nicole. Holly. We'll go with Holly in this situation because fuck off, Serena. I can't believe she would even have this picture and use it in this sense. Like, I was as grossed out and surprised as I feel like June is in this situation. June's gonna have a real steep tumble of realization and disappointment and surprise in the last 5 minutes of this episode. And it starts here with like her really holding on to hope that Serena had and is changing, and that she's got another ally in taking down Gilead. And what she's finding is that once again, Serena is just not capable of that large scale change. She's not seeing it the same way. She's just not there. And it's like every time you think Serena gets it, and every time that you think she's taken one step forward, she takes another step backwards. And it's like she still just can't see the whole picture. And there might be more of a larger chess game strategy for Serena here, but definitely from June's perspective, and I'm feeling like from mine too, it's just a slap in the face. Like, she should really be like, I think June just wants to see her out there really speaking out against the idea of handmaids and using this fertility center as a replacement for handmaids, not just a retirement center for them. So June's about to go downstairs and have her world rocked. And before that, she's got this like mini earthquake with this realization that Serena and these New Bethlehem plans and this marriage to Wharton is just more of the same. And any hopes that Serena was gonna wear the apron and pull the strings in a way in which June feels is proactive enough to bring down Gilead, Serena wants to make Gilead tolerable for everybody. And as June already called her out on, she's just making it more tolerable for herself. And the fact that she can't see that after everything she's been through is really makes me want to bash my head against the wall. And I imagine that June is feeling very similarly at this point. But I guess we also shouldn't be surprised that we're surprised by this at this point with Serena. So Nick bursts in the door and he asks where Serena is, and then he immediately asks June to go to Paris with him. And she's asking him if he's okay, and she's smiling, and she's like happy to see him, but she's also just trying to get a read on him. She doesn't know what just happened with his father-in-law. She's been waiting for him to come pick her up, and now he's just walking in the door and being like, let's go to Paris. And she doesn't ever say yes. Like, to be clear, she doesn't say yes, but I think she doesn't hate the idea. she never brings up Luke or Moira or Mayday or the Janine plan, and surely she doesn't mean yes. Like her making out with Nick in that moment and him talking about how he's got everything in place and her mom can bring Holly. He doesn't say anything about Luke or the fact that she wants to work with Mayday or Hannah or Moira or the Jezebel plan or Janine. Like June isn't going to flee and go to Paris in perpetuity and have this like new life with Nick and Holly. Um, but she might entertain the idea of running away with him for a weekend and getting a better game plan. Like, I don't know. No, she's not going anywhere. She's got this Mayday plan. There's gotta be a piece of her that, as Nick is like saying that he chooses her and let's just run away together, that she is happy to hear that, because June loves Nick, but she also loves that he loves her so unequivocally. It's why she's going to be so surprised when she finds out that he has thrown her and her Mayday plan under the bus in favor of Wharton and Survival in Gilead. I don't think June has ever had to entertain the idea of Nick not being entirely 100% devoted to her. In this conversation, that's exactly what he's saying to her. She says to him at one point, she says, "What about," and my mind was thinking Luke and Hannah and Moira and Mayday and Janine and everything that we know June has going on in her world. But she stops herself and she says, "What about Rose and the baby?" And Nick just kind of flings them both off to the side and says, "I just want to be with you. It's you." And that, I think, you can just see that kind of consume her for a second. And she just starts to make out with him, and I watched it very carefully to make sure, like, I think he hears yes in that moment, but I heard that she just needed to get him to kind of step back from that Paris ledge and take a deep breath and figure out what's happening here. But they don't get that opportunity because Wharton knocks on the door, and from his vantage point at the door, he can't see Nick or June, and I'm assuming that Nick's smart enough to not have his car like in the driveway, so they're not exactly caught here, but they're not in a great position with Wharton at the door, and very much likely could be looking for Nick and this known fugitive that they're harboring. So, because we don't know where Wharton gets his information, like, it's safe to assume that he has enough people on the inside at Jezebel's to give him a heads up if his son-in-law goes there, but I would like to think he doesn't have tabs on June that closely yet. So he knocks on the door and Serena comes down quickly and she shoves him in the closet. She tries very hard to get Wharton to go outside and take the baby for a walk, and he's like, you should know better than I do that you don't wake a sleeping baby. And of course, Serena doesn't need her mothering questioned. So she says, yeah, you're right. And they continue to have this conversation right in front of June in the closet. And this is how she hears that Nick has given away their entire plan and that Jezebel's is already shut down. It's done with. But what was really interesting to me with this Wharton character, we saw his temper and his horrible mood and how awful he was with Nick in just a couple scenes ago. And then he gets the information that he wants and he's like giddy. And it's like creepy giddy. He's really happy. Extreme mood swings are another sign that Serena just doesn't know what she's getting into yet here. Like, things seem to be going very well for Wharton. He got Serena to say yes to him, and he's finally gotten Jezebel shut down. He's wanted that shut down for a while, and he was very concerned that his son-in-law Nick was into all these shady dealings, but it turns out no, he's on our side, and he has just been working to foil this Mayday plot. And June has to hear all of that from this closet sitting right next to Nick, and they can't even have a conversation about it. And he just has to watch her hear it. And then the music cuts in, and the way the light just bathes June and the darkness just fades Nick away. And you just watch June try to deal with the shock of this information, because she just didn't see it coming. From the beginning of the episode, she's talking about how much she doesn't trust Larry, but through the entire episode, she doubles down on her trust through Nick over and over and over again. So to find out that he was the one that crosses her in the end is probably going to be devastating, but given all the information, I'm going to double down on the fact that he didn't have another choice here. And for Nick and all of his situations in Gilead, and as a commander and with Wharton, and as trying to get this New Bethlehem plan off the ground and him being on the hook for everyone's security within it. If all these commanders get slaughtered because of this New Bethlehem trade route being open, like, Nick's done with. He just doesn't have another move. He was already one bad move away from the wall to begin with. That's what Wharton's telling him. It would have been above and beyond the final blow for Nick, and it wouldn't have saved June in any way. If this was going to be some kind of sacrifice that he had to make and sacrifice himself for June or for Nicole, I think he would do it. But I don't think he's going to do it in order to potentially put June at risk, which is what's going to happen if she tries to enact this Mayday plan. Now we have to see where June goes from here. Where are all those Jezebels and where's Janine? So they would be to the colonies, I guess. Like, I'm not sure where else. They're not going to integrate them into society. They're like the least integratable back into society according to Gilead. Like, they don't even want the handmaids with the Econo wives. They sure as hell aren't going to put the Jezebels with them. And so it's colonies or the wall for the Jezebels. The wall would be fucked up. Like, what the hell did they do? So, well, they existed. They tempted. They were good for nothing other than these men in this temptation. And I'm sure they could easily justify hanging all of the Jezebels as well. So Jezebel's gone. Commanders all live to see another day. Larry's still screwed and doesn't even know it yet. So we get to see Larry's reaction to finding out that Mayday's fucked and that Bell is going to continue his mission to see Larry on the wall. And even just the fact that that Wharton and all of these other commanders know that this New Bethlehem trade route has potentially opened up this ability for Mayday terrorists to come in is probably going to put a real damper on any plans that Larry had for New Bethlehem to expand anyway. And obviously he's got bigger problems with Bell being dead set on seeing him on the wall. So Larry's not in a great place, but he is working with June and Mayday, and he does still have high commander status and nothing to lose. So there's a big Hail Mary that Larry can have in these next 4 episodes for sure. But he's got a long way to go, and he's got to start making better decisions. He's got to be better at learning from his miscalculations. We've been seeing him make several different missteps and not realizing it until it's too late. Hopefully he's going to be better at strategizing. We have seen Larry down and out before and rise up to be more powerful. So I'm not counting him out by any means. I'm really curious to see what his next move is in the next episode. Then we've got Serena. Don't do it, Serena. Jesus gracious, don't fucking marry this guy. But like, Serena, she's the lost cause. Like, I don't know. It's not Serena. She's just so frustrating. Like, she's just so frustrating. So I don't know what's going to happen with Serena. I just know that she is probably going to marry Wharton and it's not going to go well. But maybe June has gotten through to her and she'll be able to walk it back before then. Maybe there's going to be bigger problems. Oh, no. We see the wedding. We know the wedding from the trailer. So she's going to get married. Oh, so will that be how they realign the Mayday plan? If they can't get the commanders at Jezebel's, will they get them at Serena's wedding? Or does Nick need to make major amends to June? So would you trust him though? If Nick could find a way to make amends to June that would keep him safe and wouldn't rely on her trusting him, because I don't think she's going to trust him at this point, then Nick working for Mayday or getting Hannah out, I don't know. I don't know where we're going to go from here. I guess it depends on how pragmatic June is about what Nick did. Because I think if she's really being fair, she would understand that he didn't have another option. But I don't know if she's going to see it that way. She's stuck in a closet with him, so he's going to have to bring her across the border. They're going to have a conversation. They might be able to see each other's point of view, or would he not bring her back? Well, that'd be fucked up. Kind of hold her hostage in Gilead until she agrees to go to Paris with him. But I'm assuming she's not going to Paris with him now. Ooh. Can you imagine Holly finding out that she ran away to Paris after everything went down? No, like, June's not going to Paris, and she's probably going back to Mayday. A lot of surprises in this episode, a whole lot of unknowns. June's unwavering faith and devotion to Nick has just been shattered. So, oh, that's the next episode. That's perfect. Shattered, I think, right? I could be making that up, but I think Shattered's on the list somewhere. It would definitely make sense. It's got to be Shattered. So, all right, June's gonna be shattered. Understandably, that's what it is. She's gonna go back to Mayday. I'm curious to see what her relationship with Luke is like when she gets back, and it's gonna be kind of weird because Moira comes back without June, and I'm assuming she's gonna tell Luke the truth that June stayed with Nick for the night for no discernible reason other than he asked. Like, I don't even know how much Moira knows about why June didn't come back with her. And then Lydia is slowly making her way to Testament's Lydia. And Janine, oh, that's what I didn't talk about. We got that flashback with Lydia and Noelle. And there's been so many similarities between Noelle and Janine. And it was like Lydia was getting a second chance and a way of making amends or doing better by Janine than she did by Noelle. And in the end, Noelle and Janine are in the exact same place at this point where Lydia is. And she can't ignore the fact that every time she steps in to help these women, she ends up ruining their lives and taking their children from them. Like, that has to be a realization that Lydia comes to in order for her to make amends and change the system that she wants to change. She's still running a handmaid system where these women are going to continually have to give up their babies, and she's going to have to justify that somehow. At this point here, she's just had Janine reject her in a way that she has never seen Janine do before. They're going to have round two of that conversation. I'm assuming Janine's going to have to... Lydia will at least be able to stop Janine from going to the colonies, and she's not going to let her go. Although, Lydia sometimes does do crazy stuff like that. Like, if she gets the mirror held up to her too intensely, she like reacts horribly. More of like she reacted horribly when she was rejected by that like teacher, and it felt like that was kind of the impetus for why she turns around and turns Noelle in and gets her son put into like foster care. And I'm assuming eventually once Gilead takes over, she never gets her son back to begin with. Either way, it was just like shades of Lydia and Gilead in pre-Gilead, and you could see her really being concerned about the fitness of these mothers and trying to step in the second that she can't control them the way that she wants to, she just takes their children away and says, you aren't fit to raise these kids. And there's got to be a point in which Lydia contends with that aspect of herself. If not now, then in the Testaments. But I feel like at this point, she needs to do it now, because this is the clearest that Janine has ever been about how she feels about Lydia. And if Lydia really cares about Janine the way she says she does, I think Janine is right that she has to know somewhere in her heart that she took her child from her. She stole her child. And I don't know what Lydia's answer to that is going to be. Wow, that might be a way for her to make it up to her, is to get Angela to Janine. But in order for that to happen, I feel like Larry would have to be dead. If Larry gets killed, Naomi's a widow again. I can see a way in which Lydia could try. I don't know which way, but that would be interesting. But that might be Lydia's end goal for the series here, is making amends to Janine and finding some kind of resolution that's tolerable for both of them, given the limitations that they face. All right, that is an episode. I am going to go edit this as quickly as possible, and I think everything should be pretty easy. I don't think I'm going to have any major issues editing. It's just kind of a time slog. Like, I usually end up recording about 3 hours, and a lot of what I cut down is just like dead space and ums and ands and me reworking a sentence because I tripped and stumbled over something. and editing around like road noise when I have to re-say a sentence. And I don't think I got that one in the right spot, so that road noise will be heard. I recorded this during the day. I don't normally do that, so I might have had some building noise. I might have had some road noise, but I think that the editing process will go relatively easily. From there, I will start actually responding to some of these comments, and I would like to do a couple other videos that are not just so episode centric and a little bit more what we have coming down the pipeline, some more predictions, theories of like what's happening with the next episode, Shattered. And I definitely want to do a separate video on the Luke and Nick and June love triangle or lack thereof, because that's kind of how I feel about it. But I need to make my thoughts a little bit more coherent. And I'm kind of curious to see what June does next in this next episode, given this revelation with Nick. But it shouldn't change my opinions on this love triangle. I am just curious to see what she does next. But I don't think Nick and June are done with. I think she's just gonna have to process, and he might need to have the opportunity to explain himself. But I think that if June knows the entire situation, she should be able to forgive, at least understand why he did what he had to do. But now we're getting into more episode. Let's just be done with this for today now so I can go edit. And the only thing that I have to do first that I'm prioritizing before editing this is my daughter needs to analyze the movie Hidden Figures for her English class, and she has requested my expertise. So I'm going to take a little break from this, have some dinner, watch a movie with her, help her take some notes, and analyze that movie before I get back to analyzing the show. So thanks again for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I hope you got something useful out of this conversation. See you back here shortly, and we'll prepare for the next episode, Shattered. We only have 4 episodes left. Oh my gosh.